My name is Claire Monroe, and the moment that text lit up my phone, the air around me seemed to thicken. Don't react. They're recording you. It came from an unknown number sliding onto my lap beneath the clink of silverware and the hum of shallow conversation. We were at my in-laws' dining table, the kind of place where politeness feels like a performance, and every smile hides a blade. My mother-in-law, Patricia, was wearing that bright, almost too wide grin she saves for moments when she's already decided you're the villain. My brother-in-law avoided my eyes. And my husband, he ate like we were just having another Sunday lunch. The words on my phone rooted me to my chair, recording me, hear why. My pulse thudded in my ears, drowning out the noise of the room. I wasn't a criminal. I wasn't dangerous. I was just Claire, a high school English teacher, a mother, a wife who had learned to keep her voice low in that house no matter how sharp the insults got. I thought I understood their disdain. Patricia had never forgiven me for not coming from a respectable family, her words. But this was different. I forced my lips into the same polite curve they were expecting, and let my gaze wander casually as if I were bored. That's when I noticed them little inconsistencies I'd never paid attention to before. A picture frame just slightly out of place, a wall outlet cover crooked by half an inch, a ceramic vase on the shelf I could swear wasn't there last week. Each one felt like it was staring back at me. My mind split into two tracks on the surface, nodding at my husband's father's ramblings about the stock market. Beneath, trying to figure out who sent me that message and what they wanted me to know, or maybe what they wanted to test. Were they setting me up for some outburst waiting for me to break? It's strange you'd think a warning like that would make you panic, but for me, it was almost clarifying. If someone was risking sending it, maybe I wasn't completely alone in that house. Maybe one pair of eyes saw the whole game and wanted me to be ready. I didn't let my fork tremble, didn't let my smile crack. But inside, a quiet decision was already forming. If they wanted to capture me on camera, I'd give them nothing they could use, and maybe, just maybe, I'd start capturing them instead. Not just for my own protection, but for something I didn't dare name yet proof. That lunch didn't end with a scene. I didn't storm out or confront anyone. I excused myself when the dishes were cleared, kissed my son on the head, and told Patricia, "Thank you for lunch," with all the sweetness I could muster. But as I walked out the door, my fingers were still wrapped around my phone like it was a loaded weapon. In that moment, I knew the rules had shifted. This wasn't just about tense family meals or cold shoulders anymore. This was a game of traps and shadows, and someone had just given me a flashlight. I didn't know yet what it would reveal, but I was ready to start looking. I woke up the next morning with the taste of that text still in my mouth, metallic, like fear and adrenaline mixed together. My husband Aaron was already in the kitchen, scrolling through his phone like the world outside the screen didn't matter. He looked up, offered a morning, and went back to tapping. I studied his face for any flicker of guilt, but it was blank. Too blank. Patricia's smile from yesterday flashed in my mind. I'd seen it before the day she told me some people marry to escape their own messes in front of half the family. I'd stood there smiling, pouring wine, feeling every drop burn on the way down. She believed she was untouchable in that house, and maybe until now she was right. I brewed my coffee slowly, forcing myself to move like nothing had changed, but inside, the gears were grinding. Who sent that warning? Why now? And most importantly, what were they hoping to catch me doing? The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. If there were cameras, there was a goal. And if Patricia had any say in it, that goal wasn't to preserve family memories. It was to paint me into a corner where I looked unstable, unfit, unworthy. I'd seen her pull smaller stunts before twisting a comment I'd made into an insult, exaggerating my reaction until the whole room saw me as emotional. Cameras would make her lies harder to refute. Aaron cleared his throat. "You're quiet this morning." I looked up from my mug. "Just tired," I said. He nodded like he believed me, but his eyes lingered a second too long before darting away. "And here's where I need to say something to you. Yes, you watching this right now. If you've ever been in a room where you could feel the walls listening, where every move might be twisted into a weapon, leave a comment below. Tell me where you're from and how you handled it. It's one thing to survive it, it's another to know you're not alone." Back to that morning. Aaron left for work without a kiss goodbye, which was fine by me. I didn't have the energy to pretend. The moment the door closed, I walked the house slowly, scanning like my life depended on it. I didn't touch anything, didn't open drawers, just looked. That's when I spotted it. In the hallway near the guest room, a small vent cover that didn't match the others. The screws looked new. My pulse jumped. I leaned close and saw the tiniest reflection of my own eye in a black dome tucked behind the slats. I stepped back fast. Whoever installed it wanted it hidden but not invisible. That was strategic, a reminder to behave. I sat on the couch, staring at nothing, weighing my options. I could rip it out, confront them, demand answers. But that would give them exactly what they wanted: a scene, a meltdown, something to edit and replay until even I wondered if I'd lost it. No. If they wanted a show, I'd give them a performance so controlled it would drive them insane. And meanwhile, I'd start my own recording. Every day. Every room. Not in secret, but in plain sight, a quiet message that I wasn't afraid to hold the mirror up to them. The first step, though, was figuring out who was on my side. The warning text meant someone was watching me, but not everyone in that house was the enemy. Or maybe they were, and this was just another trap. Either way, I couldn't afford to guess wrong. I poured another cup of coffee, set it down, and pulled out my phone. The number that texted me was already gone from my messages deleted. My chest tightened. That meant they knew how to cover their tracks. But it also meant they were still out there somewhere between ally and adversary. That afternoon, I watched Aaron's face carefully when he came home. He asked about my day. I smiled and said quiet, just how I like it. He smiled back, but it didn't reach his eyes. And in that silence, I realized something important. This wasn't a war I could win in a single battle. It would be a slow burn, and I had to start now. The next few days, I moved through my own house like a guest. Every sound, every shadow, every out-of-place object caught my attention. It wasn't paranoia, it was pattern recognition. Years of teaching literature had trained me to notice when something didn't fit the story. And lately, the story of my life had too many loose threads. One Tuesday afternoon, while Aaron was at work and my son was at soccer practice, I decided to do a slow sweep. No gloves, no flashlight, just my eyes and a calm, steady pace as if I were straightening up. The first thing that caught my eye was the bookshelf in the den. The middle shelf sagged slightly, but not from weight, it was from being removed and replaced. I ran my fingertips along the edge. There a faint ridge of adhesive, not dust. I slid a few books aside and found a pinhole drilled into the wood no wider than the head of a pen. It pointed directly at the couch where I read every night. My skin prickled. I stepped back, scanning the rest of the room. The ceramic lamp on the side table wasn't ours. I remembered buying a matching pair with my paycheck last year, but this one was slightly taller. I unplugged it, and sure enough, the cord was heavier than it should have been. Whoever placed it there wanted a perfect view of anyone sitting in that room. The more I found, the more I realized this wasn't some amateur trick. It was systematic. A vent here, a picture frame there, a piece of furniture swapped out for something almost identical. If I hadn't been looking, I never would have seen it. That's the point, they wanted me to live in it without noticing. I thought about Patricia's smug smile at dinner, about Aaron's careful avoidance of certain topics, and about the fact that my son's bedroom door had been accidentally left open lately. It was all too neat, too intentional. By the time I reached the upstairs hallway, I was trembling, but not from fear, from anger. They wanted to invade my space, fine. But I'd make sure every invasion came with a receipt. That night, I didn't touch the devices. I left everything exactly as I found it. Instead, I ordered my own set of cameras, ones I controlled. I placed them openly in the kitchen, the living room, the front hallway. Not hidden, not subtle. Every time Aaron or Patricia saw one, they'd know the lens was mine, and so was the footage. 2 days later, the first sign of discomfort showed. Patricia came over to drop off cookies and froze when she saw the camera above the kitchen sink. "What's that for?" she asked. I smiled sweetly. "Oh, just keeping an eye on things while I'm out. You never know who might come in uninvited." Her lips tightened. That night, Aaron asked why I suddenly wanted cameras. "For the same reason you do," I replied, watching his expression falter. But here's where I want to pause for a moment. If you've ever caught someone snooping, spying, or crossing a line they shouldn't, tell me in the comments what you did about it. Because sometimes the smallest act of defiance can be the first step toward taking back control. By the end of the week, I had mapped every suspicious object in the house. I didn't dismantle them. Not yet. Knowledge was leverage, and I wasn't ready to spend it. On Friday night, Aaron's phone buzzed while he was in the shower. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. The preview of the text made my heart slam. Got everything we need. The next step is hers. No name, just a number I didn't recognize. I put the phone back exactly as it was and stepped away, my mind already racing. They thought I was still in the dark. That was their mistake. Because now I wasn't just the subject of their story, I was writing my own. The following Sunday, the air in the house felt staged. Aaron suggested we all spend the day together, which was out of character. He never cared for lazy Sundays unless Patricia was involved. Sure enough, by mid-morning she arrived wearing her pearls and that perfume that made the room feel smaller. She brought a pie, but it wasn't about dessert. She drifted from room to room, touching things she didn't need to touch, straightening the already straight towels, shifting a vase 2 inches to the left, adjusting the blinds in the living room. I watched her hands more than her face. She was checking something. I played along. I offered coffee, made small talk about the weather, asked about her bridge club. My son sat at the table drawing oblivious. But in my head I was replaying the text on Aaron's phone. Got everything we need. The next step is hers. When they went to the backyard to get some fresh air, I slipped into Aaron's office. His computer was on as usual. He never turned it off, claiming it took too long to start up. A single folder on the desktop caught my attention: receipts. The name was too ordinary to be ordinary. I opened it and froze. Inside were subfolders labeled by date, weeks worth of them. Each one contained video clips with titles like Kitchen 0815, Living Room 0816, Bedroom 08. My breath caught when I opened one labeled Bedroom 0818. It was me folding laundry, humming to myself. Harmless. But in another clip from the same day, my voice was overlaid, angry sharp, from an entirely different conversation. They were editing. I scrolled further and found clips of me in the bathroom, my son's room, even the front porch. The violation was complete. Every private moment was a potential weapon in their hands. That was the moment the fear burned away. What replaced it was cold and heavy, a decision. I closed the folder, memorized the file structure, and slipped back into the living room before they came in. I laughed at a joke Aaron made, even reached for another slice of pie. Later that night, when Aaron fell asleep on the couch, I took a small external drive from my desk drawer. In 15 minutes, I had copied every single file from that folder onto it. My hands didn't shake, my heart didn't race. I was calm, too calm maybe. Because now I had what they had, and that meant the balance had shifted. I hid the drive inside a hollowed-out book on my office shelf. It was one of those mystery novels Patricia hated. She'd never touch it. The next day, I spent hours in the public library, my laptop open, headphones in. I went through the clips one by one, making notes, marking inconsistencies, dates that didn't match audio, that didn't belong, images stitched together. They weren't just spying, they were constructing an alternate reality, one where I was unstable, erratic, maybe even dangerous. By the time the library lights flickered for closing, I knew exactly what they were trying to do: build a case to take my son away. I walked out into the cool evening air, my mind sharp. They had made one critical mistake. They underestimated the fact that I notice everything. If they wanted to play this game, I'd learn every rule, every loophole, every tactic. And I wouldn't just survive it, I'd win. The day after I uncovered their little archive, the house felt like it was breathing down my neck. Every time I walked past a vent or a picture frame, I felt eyes on me. That morning I made a choice: I wouldn't rip the devices out. Not yet. Destroying them would tip my hand. Instead, I'd let them keep filming while I quietly rewrote the script. I started by changing my own habits. No more arguments with Aaron in the kitchen where the ceiling vent watched us. If I needed to vent my frustration, I'd do it in the middle of the backyard, far from walls and wires. I wore neutral colors, kept my tone level, and filled my day with things they couldn't twist: reading, gardening, baking cookies with my son. Every smile, every calm word, I imagined them watching and seething at my refusal to break. But while I played the perfect picture for their cameras, I dug deeper into the files I'd copied. It was during one of these late-night review sessions that I spotted something I hadn't noticed before: a conversation between my son and Patricia. In the clip, she leaned in close to him and whispered, "Soon your mommy's going to leave and the house will be yours." My stomach turned. That wasn't just manipulation, that was planting seeds meant to uproot his trust in me. I paused the video and stared at the frozen frame. My little boy's eyes were wide, confused, like he was trying to make sense of words that didn't belong in a child's world. That image alone could make me cry or burn down the house. It depended on the day. The realization hit me hard. This wasn't only about destroying my image. It was about rewriting my son's childhood so that in his memories, I was the villain. That night I didn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and wondering how many times Patricia had planted poison in his head when I wasn't looking. How many bedtime stories had been laced with lies. And this is where I want to stop and ask you something. What would you do if someone you trusted started whispering poison into your child's ear? Would you confront them outright or gather every piece of proof before striking? Tell me in the comments. I want to know, because some of you have fought battles like this, and there's no playbook for it. The next morning, I packed my son's lunch with a smile and told him I'd pick him up from school early for ice cream. He grinned, and for a second it was just us again. But behind that moment was the quiet vow I'd made while lying awake I would not let them win. When Aaron left for work, I called a law firm I'd found during one of my library research sessions, a team specializing in privacy violations and emotional abuse. I didn't tell them everything over the phone, just enough to get a meeting. Then I packed the external drive into my bag and walked out of the house without looking back. That meeting was the first step toward turning defense into offense. My lawyer didn't just listen. She leaned forward, took notes, and when I showed her the video of Patricia with my son, she said 5 words that sent a shiver down my spine. They just dug their own grave. I walked out of the law firm that afternoon with a strange mix of exhaustion and clarity. The city noise felt muted, like I'd stepped into a different frequency. For weeks, I'd been playing their game without knowing the rules. Now, with a legal mind in my corner, I finally had a map. The plan was straightforward: on paper document every violation, preserve every file, and quietly prepare for a formal case. But in reality, it meant I had to keep living under the same roof as people who wanted to erase me. That was the part no one tells you about: how much discipline it takes to sit at a dinner table with your enemy and pass them the salt like nothing's wrong. When I got home, Aaron was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, scrolling on his phone. He looked up almost casually and said, "Mom's thinking of stopping by tomorrow. She says she wants to clear the air." I almost laughed. Patricia didn't clear the air, she poisoned it, then handed you the bottle so you'd look guilty. "Sure," I said, and went upstairs before he could see the disgust in my eyes. That night, while Aaron showered, I set my own cameras to record audio as well as video. Not hidden, but placed in spots they couldn't easily remove without looking suspicious. I wanted them to know I was watching now, too. The next day, Patricia arrived right on time, wearing that same polished smile. She brought a tin of cookies, set them on the counter, and then, true to form, started straightening things. Moving coasters, adjusting picture frames, standing in corners for a beat too long. I caught her glancing toward one of my cameras, and for the first time she didn't look smug. She looked irritated. We sat down with coffee. She started talking about how stressful things have been lately, and how maybe some space would be good for everyone. I sipped my drink, nodded, and gave her nothing. She was fishing for a reaction, and I wasn't about to hand it over. But later, as I reviewed the footage, I caught something important. While I stepped away to get more cream, she leaned toward my son and said, "Daddy and I just want what's best for you." She didn't say mommy at all, like I was already erased from the equation. My stomach tightened. Every word was part of a long game. That night I sat on the edge of my bed, the glow from my laptop lighting the room, and thought about all the times I'd swallowed my anger for the sake of keeping the peace. That peace had never been real. It was a weapon they used to keep me still. And I'm going to be real with you here. If you've ever had to bite your tongue because speaking up would cost you more than staying quiet, I want to hear about it. Drop it in the comments. Not just for me, but for everyone else watching who needs to know they're not the only one walking that tightrope. By the end of that week, I had hours of footage showing subtle manipulations, whispered suggestions, and carefully staged moments designed to make me look unstable. Every file was backed up twice, once on a password-protected drive, and once on an encrypted cloud account only my lawyer and I could access. It was slow, deliberate work, but that's the thing about building a case: you can't rush it. You have to let them think they're still in control right up until the moment you pull the floor out from under them. And with each day that passed, I could feel that moment getting closer. By the following Monday, the line between my home and a crime scene felt paper thin. I had spent the weekend combing through every clip, every audio file, and cataloging them into neat folders for my lawyer. Each time I labeled one manipulation, I felt my resolve harden. This wasn't just a toxic family dynamic anymore. It was a calculated operation to strip me of my rights as a mother. At 9:00 a.m., I walked into the law office with my laptop bag slung over my shoulder like armor. My attorney Dana greeted me with a firm handshake and got straight to business. She asked for a rundown of the newest evidence. I plugged in the external drive and pulled up the files of Patricia, whispering to my son the doctored video clips, the hidden camera footage from my own devices catching her in the act. Dana didn't interrupt, didn't even blink. When I finished, she tapped her pen on her notepad and said, "We're not just talking invasion of privacy anymore. This is emotional abuse and custodial interference. We can file 3 separate motions today." That was the first moment I realized the scope of what I'd uncovered. This wasn't going to be a drawn-out he said, she said. This was going to be a legal sledgehammer. We drafted the documents on the spot, a petition for a forensic review of every recording device in the house, a request for a protection order preventing Patricia from contacting my son, a motion to formally open an investigation into Aaron's participation in the surveillance. By noon, everything was filed. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt lighter. Not free, never free, not yet, but no longer just a target. I was moving pieces on the board now. That night, Aaron noticed the shift. He came home earlier than usual, his smile just a little too fixed. "How was your day?" he asked, leaning against the doorway. "Quiet," I replied, locking eyes with him. He held my gaze for a moment, then looked away. 2 days later, Dana called with news the judge had granted an emergency hearing for the protection order. If it went through, Patricia would be legally barred from seeing my son until the investigation concluded. That was the first domino, and once it fell, the rest could follow. I didn't tell Aaron, not yet. I wanted him to feel the tremor only when the ground gave way beneath him. In the meantime, I doubled my precautions. I replaced the locks on the front and back doors. I kept my own recordings rolling whenever Aaron or Patricia was in the house. I even set up a decoy laptop in the office, one they could snoop on without finding anything useful, just to see if they would take the bait. Sure enough, one evening, while I was out running errands, my hallway camera caught Aaron in the office opening the decoy laptop and scrolling for a full 10 minutes. He didn't find anything, of course, but the footage proved something else. He was actively searching for my moves. That clip went straight into the legal ammo folder. By the end of the week, I had a neat, growing arsenal of proof: Patricia's manipulations, Aaron's complicity, the altered videos, and now the attempted snooping. The narrative they'd been crafting for months was starting to collapse, not in a burst, but in a slow, inevitable implosion. And I want to say this to you watching: when someone's trying to write your story for you, the most powerful thing you can do is keep your own receipts. Every detail, every date, every slip-up, it's all ink for the truth. The emergency hearing was scheduled for the following Friday. Until then, all I had to do was keep my head down, play my part, and wait for the moment to flip the script entirely. The Wednesday before the emergency hearing, I found something that made my skin crawl, not because it was shocking, but because it confirmed everything I'd feared. It started innocently enough. My son Ethan had left his backpack on the kitchen counter after school. Normally, I'd just toss it toward the stairs and remind him to put it away, but this time a folded piece of paper peeked out from between his math notebook and his lunchbox. I pulled it free. The handwriting was in a slanted cursive, not his. 4 words stopped me cold. "You need to leave." Underneath, in smaller letters, "They're going to use the boy." No signature. For a long moment, I just stood there at the counter paper, trembling between my fingers. Whoever wrote it knew enough to be afraid. And they knew exactly what was at stake. That night, after tucking Ethan into bed, I sat in the hallway outside his room, listening to the rhythm of his breathing. My mind kept circling back to the note. Someone in that house, or orbiting close enough, was trying to warn me. But why stay anonymous? Fear, probably. Patricia had a way of making people choose between loyalty and survival. I waited until the next afternoon to bring it up with Dana. She took one look at the note and said, "We'll add this to the file. It strengthens the pattern of intent manipulation through the child, and it gives us cause to push for emergency restrictions now, not later." That was all I needed to hear. We filed an emergency clause that same day, asking the court to temporarily suspend Patricia's contact with Ethan until the investigation concluded. The judge's office said they'd review it immediately. That night I was in the kitchen when Ethan shuffled in, rubbing his eyes. "Mom," he said quietly, "is it true you want to take me away and never come back?" My breath caught. "Who told you that?" I asked, though I already knew. He hesitated, glanced toward the hallway as if someone might overhear, and whispered, "Grandma." I knelt down so we were eye to eye. "Ethan, that's not true. I would never leave you. Ever. No one has the right to tell you otherwise." His little shoulders relaxed a bit, but there was still doubt in his eyes, and that broke me in a way nothing else had. That moment shifted everything. Up until now, my primary goal had been self-preservation. Now it was about protecting Ethan's mind, his trust, his childhood. Patricia's campaign wasn't just about discrediting me. It was about rewriting his memories so that one day he'd believe she had always been the safe one. 2 days later, the court granted the emergency order. Patricia was barred from any contact with Ethan. No visits, no calls, nothing. The relief I felt was sharp, almost physical, like a weight lifting off my chest. Aaron's reaction came within hours. He slammed his fork down at dinner, glaring at me. "You're tearing this family apart," he said. I didn't even look up from my plate. "No, Aaron, I'm keeping my son safe." Inside, though, I knew this was only the beginning. They wouldn't take this quietly. People like Patricia didn't know how to retreat, they only knew how to regroup. And Aaron. His silence in the face of her abuse had always been too loud. That night, as I locked the front door, I told myself something simple but unshakable. The next move would be mine. And when it came, they wouldn't see it coming. Friday morning arrived like the crack of a starting pistol. The emergency hearing was set for 10:00 a.m., and I'd been awake since before sunrise, pacing the kitchen with a mug of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Dana picked me up right on time, her calm presence cutting through my jittery energy. In the courtroom, Patricia sat on the opposite side, her pearls gleaming under the fluorescent lights, her mouth curled into the faintest smirk. Aaron was beside her, eyes darting between me and the judge's bench, like he was waiting for a cue. Dana presented the evidence in measured, deliberate strokes, Patricia's whispered manipulation to Ethan, the anonymous note, my own recordings of subtle but undeniable emotional coercion. Then she lowered the hammer. "Your Honor, this is not a matter of personal disagreement. This is a calculated attempt to undermine my client's parental relationship and fabricate grounds for custody removal." Patricia's smirk faltered. Aaron shifted uncomfortably. The judge reviewed the documents, took in the still frame of Patricia leaning over Ethan, and finally said, "The protection order stands. Effective immediately, Ms. Graham is prohibited from any contact with the child until further notice." It was the first time in months that I'd felt the air go back into my lungs. Dana squeezed my hand under the table, and I managed the smallest smile. One domino down. When we left the courthouse, Dana reminded me they'll push back. Hard. Be ready. And she was right. That night, the retaliation came. Patricia showed up outside my house just before sunset, screaming from the sidewalk, "What did you do, you ungrateful brat?" Her voice carried down the street loud enough for neighbors to peek out their windows. I didn't engage. I just closed the blinds, locked the door, and let her wear herself out. The next morning, my victory was vandalized, literally. My car sat in the driveway, covered in deep scratches, words like "crazy monster" and "bad mom" carved into the paint and splashed in white spray. Ethan saw it before I did, standing frozen on the porch, as if the letters were written in fire. I knelt beside him and said, "Someone very sad must have done that." My voice was calm, but inside I was boiling. What Patricia didn't know was that I'd installed a micro camera above the garage entrance 2 weeks earlier. That night, I reviewed the footage, and there she was, black coat, hood pulled low, leaving her signature like a calling card. When I showed Dana, she didn't even blink. Now, we have her on criminal damage and harassment. This goes straight into the case file. By Monday, we'd filed for an additional restraining order to keep her away from me and the property entirely. It was another step forward, but I could feel the stakes climbing. Aaron was quieter than usual, which didn't mean he'd stopped fighting, only that he was moving his pieces in silence. And here's where I'll leave you hanging for just a second, because what happened next made me realize that winning one battle doesn't mean you're safe from the war. In fact, the moment I thought I'd gained the upper hand, they revealed just how far they were willing to go. 2 days after the restraining order was filed, the house felt unnervingly quiet. No slamming doors, no dramatic phone calls from Patricia, no Aaron stomping around muttering under his breath. It should have been a relief, but to me, it felt like the calm before a storm. That's when the email arrived. I was sitting at the kitchen table sorting through lesson plans for my students when my phone buzzed. The subject line was blank, the sender's name unfamiliar. I almost deleted it until I saw the first sentence, "You need to know the whole plan." Attached was a PDF scan of a forwarded email chain. The original sender, Patricia. The recipient, Aaron's younger sister, Melissa. My heart kicked hard against my ribs. I opened the attachment and the words hit me like cold water, Project Dakota if she snaps. Below were bullet points that read like instructions for a stage play. Install discrete recording devices in main living spaces and bedrooms. Rotate objects and sightlines to conceal lenses. Introduce verbal triggers. You're not okay. Forgetting things again? Do you need help? Encourage child to share reactions, coach with rewards. I scrolled down and saw notes on best dates to provoke me, times when I'd be home alone with Ethan, or when Aaron could be at work but still monitoring remotely. For a moment I just sat there, staring at the screen, my pulse roaring in my ears. This wasn't suspicion anymore. It was documented, premeditated sabotage. My phone rang. It was Melissa. Her voice was shaky, almost whispering. "I can't keep this in anymore. I know what they've been doing and I'm done pretending I don't." She admitted she'd forwarded me the email and that she had more video files, notes, even an old flash drive Patricia had given her just in case. "Why now?" I asked. "Because she said I thought they'd stop before it got to Ethan. But now." Her voice broke. "Now they're trying to take him from you and I can't be part of it." We agreed to meet at a quiet cafe downtown. She showed up with the flash drive, sliding it across the table like we were in a spy movie. "Do what you want with it," she said. "Just keep my name out of it." Back home, I plugged in the drive. Inside were more recordings, unedited versions of clips Patricia had sent to Aaron, some clearly staged, to make me look erratic. But there were also personal notes in Patricia's handwriting, observations of my mood swings, suggestions for how Aaron could protect himself legally, and a chilling line that read, "Goal custody shift, plus property reassignment." I printed everything, slid it into a manila envelope, and called Dana. When I handed her the documents the next morning, she read in silence for a long time. Then she looked up and said, "We're filing for defamation, illegal surveillance, emotional abuse, and attempted judicial fraud. This changes everything." That was when I realized something important. Patricia and Aaron had been planning this for nearly a year, but they'd made one fatal error. They'd trusted someone who still had a conscience. Now I had their blueprint, and with it, I could dismantle their entire operation piece by piece. I knew the moment I saw Patricia's Project Dakota email that this war was no longer being fought in shadows, it was ready for daylight. And I also knew the perfect stage to burn their whole theater down my upcoming birthday dinner. It was supposed to be small, just family, maybe a couple of friends. But I changed the guest list. I invited everyone. The same people who'd heard Patricia's gossip, the relatives who whispered about my attitude, the friends who'd started keeping their distance because of Aaron's subtle smear campaign. If they'd been fed the lies, they were going to see the truth. For the next week, I prepared, not just with food and flowers, but with footage. Dana helped me edit a presentation that was impossible to argue with, side-by-side comparisons of Patricia's doctored clips next to the originals. You'd see a video where I looked unhinged, then immediately the untouched version showing the full context, me reading a letter from my late father or comforting Ethan after a nightmare. We added dates, timestamps, and the audio of Patricia coaching Ethan with rewards to share my private reactions. The night of the dinner, I arrived early at the small event hall I'd rented. A tech guy I'd hired set up the projector and sound system. Each table had soft lighting and fresh flowers, the kind of setting that made you think you were in for a warm family evening. That illusion was important. When guests arrived, I greeted them with a smile, hugged the ones who'd still let me, and made polite small talk. Patricia swept in, wearing her favorite cream suit, Aaron trailing behind her, both acting like nothing had ever been wrong. We sat, ate, and halfway through dessert, I stood. Before we wrap up, I said, keeping my voice light, I wanted to share something personal tonight. A little family project. The lights dimmed. The projector clicked on. The first image was me reading to Ethan in his room, his little head resting on my shoulder. Soft, harmless. Then the screen split. On the right side, the doctored clip muted, except for Patricia's inserted narration. "She's not well." On the left, the original audio played, full of gentle laughter. Murmurs began, faces shifted. Clip after clip rolled. Me supposedly yelling at Aaron when the original showed him needling me for 10 straight minutes until I finally raised my voice. Me in a rage in the kitchen when the original showed me dropping a glass and scolding myself for the mess. The room was dead quiet except for the audio. Then came the emails. The bullet points about verbal triggers. The coaching of Ethan. The goal of custody shift, plus property reassignment. Halfway through, Patricia slammed her hand on the table. "You set all this up," she shouted. Before I could answer, her husband, Aaron's father, stood. "No, Agnes. You set it up. I bought the first camera, but I never knew you were manipulating the child. You've gone too far." Aaron lunged toward the tech booth, but the technician blocked him. "There's one more part," he said, glancing at me. I nodded. The last clip was Aaron in his office speaking to his lawyer. "I'll push her until she loses custody. Then we'll get the house and the kid." A woman at the back gasped. An uncle stood and walked out. Patricia's hands trembled. Aaron just stared at me, eyes wide, jaw clenched. When the lights came back on, I looked around the room. I didn't ruin anything, I said evenly. I just took off the masks. No one met my eyes as I walked out. The birthday cake sat untouched on the table. 2 days after the birthday dinner, the fallout started to ripple. Patricia vanished from the usual family chat. Aaron stayed out late without explanation, and whispers started coming in through mutual friends. Half the people who'd been at that table were suddenly reevaluating what they thought they knew. That was good, but I also knew it wasn't enough. The dinner had exposed what they'd done. Now I needed to expose who had been enabling it. It started with a message from a woman named Laura, someone I barely knew except for passing hellos at school pickup. She'd seen the clips, someone had already leaked them online and wanted to meet. Over coffee, she told me she'd gone through almost the exact same nightmare years ago. With Aaron. Same tactics, same whispered poison to her child. And in her case, it had all been swept under the rug by a family friend who was also a high-ranking partner at Aaron's law firm. Her description of him matched exactly with someone I already recognized, Thomas Avery, the man who'd given Aaron his job, who'd attended our wedding, who always shook my hand a beat too long and looked through me like I wasn't there. When I got home, I dug into old paperwork, contracts, property transfers, even the prenuptial agreement I'd stupidly signed. Thomas's name was everywhere. He'd notarized documents, served as witness, and according to a few clauses controlled certain trust accounts tied to Aaron's assets. It wasn't just that he'd covered for Aaron before. He had a vested interest in keeping Aaron right where he was. I took this straight to Dana. She didn't even blink. If we can prove his involvement in the surveillance or the custody manipulation, we're not just talking about family court anymore. We're talking about a professional misconduct case. He could lose his license. That became my new mission. I reached back out to Laura, asking if she'd be willing to provide a sworn statement. She agreed, and she had receipts. Old emails, text messages, even a recorded voicemail from Thomas advising Aaron on how to push her buttons to document instability. For the next week, Dana and I built a second case file parallel to the first, this one aimed squarely at Thomas. The more we found, the clearer the picture became. Patricia and Aaron had been the hands, but Thomas was the mind that showed them how to move the pieces. I couldn't help thinking back to all those family dinners where he'd been present, laughing with Patricia, giving Aaron those subtle nods. How much of my marriage had been a chessboard to them? How many moments had been orchestrated, not spontaneous? I was angry, yes. But more than that, I was focused. Because if there's one thing I'd learned, it's that taking down the enablers cuts deeper than confronting the obvious villains. By the end of the week, Dana was ready to file a complaint with the State Bar Association. If approved, it would trigger a formal investigation into Thomas's conduct, potentially freezing his ability to practice law while it was ongoing. Still, part of me hesitated. This was bigger than Patricia, bigger than Aaron. It was a network, and networks don't just collapse quietly. They lash out. And I need you to hear this: when you go after the architect of the harm, not just the one swinging the hammer, you have to be ready for the entire structure to fight back. That's the part no one warns you about. The complaint went in on a Monday morning. By Wednesday, I noticed a black sedan parked across the street, engine idling. It didn't move for 3 hours. That was when I knew the next phase of this war had already begun. If Patricia's smears had been a slow poison and Aaron's complicity a steady knife at my back, then Thomas was the architect of the whole trap. Taking him down meant pulling the pin in the grenade, and I decided the detonation was going to happen in the most public way possible. The opportunity came faster than I expected. A flyer appeared in my mailbox for a local community leadership awards banquet. I wasn't surprised to see Thomas Avery listed as one of the honorees. What did surprise me was the fact that the event was open to the public. That meant cameras, that meant witnesses, and that meant I could choose the exact moment the mask came off. For the next 2 weeks, I prepared like I was going to trial. Dana and I refined a package of evidence: the Project Dakota files, the doctored clips, the recordings of Patricia, the emails between Thomas and Aaron, and Laura's sworn statement about his past involvement in her custody case. We also had a new gem security footage from the black sedan that had been following me traced back to a private investigator licensed under Thomas's firm. The night of the banquet, I arrived early wearing a sleek navy dress that made me feel both invisible and untouchable. I took a seat near the back, waiting through the speeches, the polite applause, the clinking of glasses. When Thomas's name was called, he walked to the podium with his usual air of quiet superiority. He thanked the community, the organizers, his colleagues. And then, just as he was about to step down, I stood. "Excuse me," I said loudly enough to cut through the room's chatter. "Before we all applaud, I think the community deserves to see who they're celebrating." A few heads turned. Thomas froze mid-step. I walked to the small AV table near the stage, plugged in a USB drive, and hit play. The banquet hall's screens lit up with footage: Patricia whispering to Ethan Aaron, discussing custody strategy, Thomas himself advising on how to provoke a documented reaction. Murmurs turned to gasps. People craned their necks, phones lifted to record. The final slide was a screenshot of the Bar Association complaint, stamped with filed in bold red letters. Thomas stepped forward, voice tight. "This is a gross invasion of privacy." I met his gaze. So is hiding cameras in a child's bedroom. So is using the law to destroy families for profit. The MC clearly panicked, tried to cut the feed, but it was too late. Half the room was already live streaming. One man near the front stood and shouted, "Is this true, Avery?" Others followed with questions, accusations, the polite veneer of the banquet crumbling into open confrontation. Thomas's face was pale, but his eyes were hard. "You'll regret this," he said quietly as I walked past him. I leaned in just enough for only him to hear. "You'll regret underestimating me." By the time I got home, the clips were already spreading online, tagged with words like "expose" and "I justice for Ethan." Local reporters were emailing me before midnight. The next morning, the Bar Association confirmed that their investigation into Thomas had been escalated to an emergency review. But even as the adrenaline surged, I knew this wasn't the end. The more public the fight became, the more dangerous it would get. People like Thomas didn't fade quietly into shame. They fought tooth and nail to bury their accusers. And yet, for the first time, I wasn't just reacting. I was dictating the tempo. The morning after the banquet, the air felt different, charged, like the whole city had seen through the glass walls of my life. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing: reporters, sympathetic strangers, old friends who suddenly believed me now that they had proof. But I knew better than to mistake public sympathy for safety. By noon, the retaliation began. First came a cease and desist letter from Thomas's law firm, full of threats about defamation and unauthorized disclosure of private communications. Dana read it, smirked, and tossed it into a folder labeled "Counterattack." Then around 3:00 p.m., my neighbor knocked on my door, pale and nervous. "There's a man taking pictures of your house," she whispered. I peeked through the blinds. There it was again, the black sedan. This time the driver wasn't trying to be subtle. He parked across the street, camera lens trained directly at my living room window. That night the threats turned personal. My email filled with anonymous messages. "You think you've won. Watch your back." And then one that made my stomach clench. "We know where Ethan goes to school." I called Dana immediately. "This isn't just intimidation," she said. "It's harassment, possibly criminal. But if we escalate, they'll know we're cornering them. You need to decide, are you ready for this to go nuclear?" I didn't answer right away. I went upstairs, sat on Ethan's bed, and watched him sleep. His small hand clutched the edge of his blanket, his breath slow and even. In that moment, the choice became painfully clear. I could retreat and hope they lost interest, or I could finish this knowing it meant stepping into the fire. The next morning, I made my decision. I told Dana to proceed with full charges: harassment, witness intimidation, conspiracy to commit fraud, and a petition to freeze Thomas's firm accounts, pending investigation. We also filed for temporary relocation protection for Ethan and me, giving us the legal right to disappear for up to 90 days if necessary. That afternoon, I started packing a go bag, just essentials: passports, cash backup drives, Ethan's favorite stuffed animal. I didn't tell him yet, but I promised myself he wouldn't see the fear that was eating at me. The counterstrike came faster than I expected. 2 days later, while I was at the grocery store, Aaron served me with an emergency motion for full custody, citing emotional instability and alienating the child from his paternal family. It was a laughable stretch, but I knew their game file enough motions flood me with legal noise and hope I'd drown. Instead, I turned their tactic against them. Dana and I used the hearing as a platform, presenting all the evidence again, only this time it was entered into the public record. That meant reporters could request it, and they did. By the time the judge dismissed Aaron's motion as unfounded and without merit, the story had broken on local news community leader tied to custody manipulation scheme under state investigation. That night, as Ethan and I ate dinner in our now too quiet kitchen, I felt the weight of what was coming next. They'd lost control of the narrative, and desperate people make dangerous moves. I looked at my son and made a silent promise the next step would be the last. The final move came sooner than I'd planned. 3 days after Aaron's failed custody grab, I was driving Ethan home from school when I spotted the black sedan in the rearview mirror again. Only this time, it wasn't keeping distance, it was tailing me through every turn. My grip tightened on the wheel, but I kept my voice light as I told Ethan we were taking the scenic route. Instead of heading straight home, I drove to the downtown police station. I didn't park out front, I pulled into the back lot where officers usually park their cruisers. As soon as the sedan pulled in behind me, 2 uniformed officers stepped out from the shadows, hands resting on their belts. The driver froze, then slowly put his hands up. Turned out Dana had quietly coordinated with a detective after the banquet blow-up. They'd been monitoring the harassment for days, waiting for a moment to catch the investigator red-handed. And here it was. Inside the station, the man gave up more than I could have imagined. He admitted he'd been hired by Thomas's firm, not just to watch me, but to follow Ethan, record our routines, and document anything that could be spun as unfit parenting. Worse, he handed over a chain of emails showing Aaron approving the surveillance invoices. That was the break we needed. Dana moved fast, filing an emergency motion to revoke Aaron's visitation entirely until the criminal case concluded. Within 48 hours, the judge granted it. Ethan was finally legally safe from both Aaron and Patricia, but I wasn't done. With the investigator's testimony, the case against Thomas's firm went from misconduct to criminal conspiracy. The state bar suspended his license pending trial. Local news ran the headline in bold, law firm partner family tied to custody manipulation scandal. I thought I'd feel triumphant, and in a way I did. But as I watched Ethan play in the backyard that afternoon, the victory felt quieter, heavier. I'd won the war, yes, but I'd lost years to it. Trust, family, pieces of myself I'd never get back. That night, as I tucked Ethan into bed, he asked, "Is it over now?" I hesitated, then said, "For us, yes. But for them, they still have to answer for what they did." He nodded like he understood more than a child should have to. The next morning, my inbox was full reporters, advocacy groups, even strangers thanking me for speaking up. But one message stood out. It was from Melissa, the sister-in-law who'd sent me the first piece of evidence. It read, "You took the house of cards down. I hope you tell the rest someday." And maybe I will. Because what happened to me isn't rare, it's just usually hidden. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, but you have to survive the storm long enough to see it. If you've stayed with me through this journey, you know this was more than a family feud. It was about power control and the lengths some will go to rewrite someone else's life. And if you think this story couldn't get darker, well, there's another chapter. Click through to my next video where I uncover what I found in Patricia's locked storage unit and why it changes everything you think you know about this case. When the dust finally settled, life didn't snap back to normal. There's no going back to the way things were after a war like that. But there was a new kind of quiet one that didn't feel like the pause before another attack, but like a deep breath I could actually finish. Ethan and I moved into a smaller house on the edge of town, with a backyard big enough for a swing set and a small vegetable garden. Every morning I'd watch him run across the grass, laughing his hair, catching the sunlight, and I'd think this is what safety looks like. The court dates tapered off. Patricia's name disappeared from my mail. Aaron moved out of state after his visitation rights were terminated, and Thomas's trial became the kind of headline you read with morning coffee. No longer a shadow in my life, just a name in the news. I started saying yes to things again. Weekend trips, dinners with friends, even joining a community art class. It was strange at first, living without the constant calculation of what's the next attack. But slowly, the habit faded. One evening, as Ethan and I painted the fence, he looked at me and said, "You're smiling more now." I hadn't realized it, but he was right. The smile felt real, unforced, like my face remembered how to hold it. If there's a lesson in all of this, it's that survival isn't just about winning. It's about reclaiming the pieces of yourself that were buried under fear. Sometimes you don't get all of them back, but the ones you do feel brighter than before. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough.